G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. Match sim and practice matches are behind us and the focus is well and truly on round 1 2026 with our match against the Hawks now just 8 days away. I'm Jonathan Walsh and as we have each year, I'm joined by my co-host Ian Hume to preview the upcoming season. Humey, we're back and locked in for season 5 of Don the Stat. How are you feeling on the eve of the season?
Hey there, Jono. Nice to see you and on a third attempt getting through your own name. That was pretty impressive there. Look, I'm really excited, mostly because we're not playing in Queensland this week with the prospect of a cyclone bearing down on us and our game being cancelled. Really excited to see some AFL this week, particularly getting a look at the Hawks closely in their match in preparation for our first game. We're actually recording right as the AFL season gets underway, but I don't mind missing the game that's currently on, as I'd rather stick rusty nails in my eyes than voluntarily watch my most hated team. And look, Carlton's not that great either. How are you doing? And how is it now having a mortal enemy in Will Snelling by leaving him off the jumper number 11 post of the countdown?
Yeah. That was, well, funny for me. Probably not, seemingly not too funny for Will, but yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you, mate. Yeah, it's come around really quick, hasn't it? I think part of the reason back playing cricket this season means that, yeah, I've kept my weekends busy with that and, yeah, haven't thought all that much about football. But, yeah, getting to the hangar for the game against the Tigers and then watching the practice game on the weekend against the Saints, it's certainly got me eager to get to the real stuff. And, yeah, we'll wake up tomorrow morning and it'll only be a week away. So I'm, very much looking forward to it, mate.
Indeed. And you brought up your cricket there and you've come back and you immediately been a good luck charm for your side. And you're back in the finals with a big semi-final this weekend. So best of luck to you there, Jono. And much like the first year we did Don the Stat, maybe Essendon's first weekend of football will coincide with a cricket grand final for you. Although hopefully the result for Essendon will be much better than last time around that happened.
Yeah, it'll be nice to have 2 wins on that weekend, mate, rather than just one. That's for sure.
Indeed. Look, before we get into the main stuff tonight, big thanks to Courtney, Joshua Nihus and Fred for signing up to the Patreon this week. Our First Thoughts episodes, which we've been releasing on the main feed during the preseason, will be Patreon exclusive during the regular season. So if you have enjoyed hearing our immediate takes on games, please do consider signing up with the link in the description. Jono just put out a companion video to the First Thoughts where you took clips from the practice game to reinforce the things you brought up in the First Thoughts, which was really well received. And you'll be seeing things like that throughout the season on the Patreon. Also, as of recording, we are just shy of 800 subscribers on YouTube. So we are plugging away at our goal of reaching 1,000 this season. So if you can, please give us a subscribe on YouTube as well. That would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, it's all building very nicely, isn't it, mate? That community's growing stronger by the day, which is exciting. And it's nice to have that as an outlet to talk footy and not have to worry about, we'll get to the Damian Barrett Award nominations shortly, but not having to worry about seeing some of the sensational stuff that's going on in News Limited publications at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. I certainly haven't paid any attention to that little program that has been coming out. But as always, the bad takes from the media keep rolling in and our patrons were quick off the mark with this one and sharing it with us. So we do have our third Damian Barrett Award nomination. This one comes from a guy who isn't even the best footballer in his family, in Jack Riewoldt. Who said on Sunday that Mason Redmond had it right when he said, quote, he couldn't trust Zach Merritt, unquote, again, to what he did in the off-season. And this is a stinker from Jack for a couple of reasons. Well, for starters, Redmond never actually used the words that he couldn't trust Zach. I think that's he's verbaled Mason Redmond there in terms of his language. And secondly, I guess Riewoldt never trusted Dustin Martin after he was basically signed, sealed, delivered for the Giants back in 2013. I don't know how they won 3 flags together with Jack clearly not being able to trust Dustin there. So, Jack, you're our third Damian Barrett Award nomination for the year. How did it end up like this?
Yeah, look, man, as someone who is the best footballer in their family, I guess I'm qualified to answer this, but it hasn't taken long for the pundits to play make-believe, has it? And I guess in Dusty's case, he also shopped himself around a couple of times, didn't he? And went and met with North Melbourne and Essendon and other clubs as well. So, it's just part of the industry. I know the way we've talked about it. We won't rehash it. Zach went about it. Wasn't great. But, I would have thought that someone who's been in the inner sanctum of a football club would understand that once the ball bounces on game day, that you just get on with things and they're never as bad as they seem. So, look, I think we just have to accept, like the supplement saga, that is being turned into kitty litter at the moment, thanks to what News Limited's doing, that the Merrett situation is just going to be one of those that gets dragged up at regular intervals throughout the season. And unfortunately for us fans, it's just another thing that we're going to have to deal with. But I think we've learnt to become a pretty resilient bunch out at Bomberland.
Yeah, indeed. Just as an aside, Adam Simpson on SEN claiming that Essendon would go 0-6 to start the season is a bit of a watch this space. It might get a retrospective nomination in the coming weeks there, although he seemed to have some logic to what he was saying. But me as an Essendon fan and looking at that fixture certainly doesn't see a 0-6 start for Essendon.
Yeah, look, let's hope he gets that very, very wrong. I think in his defence, he did at least back it up with some really detailed reasoning. So, unlike some of the other things that we have to deal with as Essendon fans in the media, he wasn't just grabbing for a headline. His explanation was that we're perhaps a lot younger as a side than a lot of people, maybe even Essendon fans, realise. That was sort of the cause for his thinking behind that. But yeah, like you, mate, I'm a little bit more optimistic on our chances than that. But at least to his credit, it was well thought out and articulated it quite well. I guess we can disagree with his opinion, but his logic was pretty sound.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, let's turn our attention to the clash against the Saints. And after a good win against the Tigers a week before, Essendon did come crashing down back to earth a little bit with a 42-point loss to the Saints in Ballarat on Saturday. The game was close up to halfway through the third quarter when the Saints piled on 4 unanswered goals, and from there on were never really threatened. It's always a bit of a mug's game to read too much into practice match results. I think we've spoken about already how Essendon beat the Bulldogs and Geelong last pre-season and didn't get close to them during the regular season. So I guess now that we're a few days removed from that clash, Jono, where do you sit with the match and what it could mean for Essendon in 2026?
Yeah, I think we got a bit over a half of really competitive footy, and then it was pretty much circle work for both teams after that, just getting miles in the legs. I know Ben Jacobs spoke in the aftermath of the match about flipping the magnets around and trying a few things. So I think that says a fair bit about what the coaches were hoping to get out of the second half. I think for me, a number of guys that were injured last year got games under their belts: Parrish, Caldwell, McKay, Reid, probably some others as well that I've missed. And then there were some young guys that showed some early signs of improvement as well. Second, third year players who are showing some improvement. And then the brand new guys showed some signs as well. I think Sharp in particular looked home at the level. Granted, a home and away game is another step up. But I think what we saw of him shows why we rated him so highly. We got to see Blackiston go up against 2 quality rucks. I like to win, but I'm okay with what we got out of the game. I think the only thing for me that I'm a little bit watch this space on is we play a team in round 1 who's playing in opening round, and we spoke about that when we had Shorey on. He expressed his view that he would prefer to have a game under the belt and be on an equal playing field. So I guess for us, 2 weeks removed from that game, to take the foot off the pedal a bit in the second half and not really press on, what does that mean for our preparation for round 1 has me a little bit nervous. But in terms of what we saw of, as I said, those guys coming back from injury, some of our young players, and then Blackiston in the ruck, I think it was as good a day as you could have in a practice match, I think.
Yeah. I think if you're looking for things, and as you say, it is a practice match and we shouldn't read too much into it, but it's probably the midfield that was the area of most concern from that game, and particularly at centre bounce. We were really exposed by the pace of the Saints. We always seemed to be half a step behind them at the clearance, and from then on we were constantly having to play from behind. They had 9 more centre clearances for the game, and that pretty much closely correlated to the inside 50 advantage that the Saints had across the day. It is a bit concerning given we had the majority of our first choice midfield out there. We were actually pretty poor in this area last year after, for a time, being quite good at centre clearance. We were ranked 15th in the comp for centre clearance differential last year, and not a great start in this area in this practice game. At least from the practice games as well, it does seem like centre clearance is going to be more important as a scoring opportunity going forward with the new ruck rules, obviously with the 6-6-6. So it's definitely something we'll need to improve on.
Yeah, I'm still a bit of a wait and see on the ruck rules. Teams aren't at their sharpest in practice matches, and competition or concentration isn't at its highest. Contests aren't at their fiercest. So I do think the practice match is a bit of a perfect storm for that really aggressive run through the centre clearance without worrying too much about your opponent or being too defensive than what we might see in home and away. I wonder whether teams will take the offensive risk the way that St Kilda did in that second half in a home and away game, or whether once you see a bit more balance between attack and defence, whether that settles things down a bit. So yeah, look, keen to see how it plays out in the first couple of weeks of the season. But yeah, I think jumping rucks certainly have things turned back in their favour now, and that combined with, or if that's combined with ruck craft, it certainly gives an advantage more so than what we've seen in previous seasons. So yeah, I think I just want to see it play out before I get too carried away with what happened on Saturday and what it means for us going forward.
Yeah. I think another thing that I said in the first thoughts that we do based on sort of immediate, we don't really dig too deeply into the numbers. And it was based on the eyesight tests that our full ground defence, I thought, held up pretty well. And we were really good at stifling the Saints ball movement from the back half. But when I went back and looked at the numbers, though, the Saints scored 6 goals from our defensive 50, which was twice what we were giving up from the back 50 last year. Now, I think a lot of those did come in that second half as opposed to the first half, where, as you say, that the intensity of the game dropped off. So again, another one of those, do you read too much into a practice game? But again, that is a little bit of a concern there. And then conversely, we could only score 1 goal from our back 50, which is a bigger issue for us in this game because of what we spoke about earlier, and the Saints having the territory advantage from their centre clearance domination. It did mean we had to play from the back half more, and as we have for a while, we did struggle to move the ball forward.
Yeah, I think that defensive transition's a bit of a tale of two stories for me, mate. I went back and so I wasn't able to watch the game in real time because I was on the cricket field. So I watched the game, just let it run through and watched it as a first experience, and then later on watched it in a bit more detail and slowed it up and rewound and made my way through it. And that was something that defensive transition and exits of our forward 50 was something that I was really keen to get a handle on. 2 of those 6 goals that they kicked from defensive 50 were in the first quarter. One of them, Blackiston actually intercepted the exit, but he pumped it back inside 50, just sort of a bit recklessly, and it came out, and it's sort of one of those ones that played out in, my theory has been for quite a while that a lot of your ability to defend transition is actually about how you go inside 50 in the first place. And that was a good example where the entry made it hard to defend. But we did at least force them wide, but we gave away a down the field free kick, which then opened up play. Our guys sort of stopped for the whistle, and then the down the field advantage was paid and they broke open. And then the second one in that first quarter, Redmond actually stopped them in the middle of the ground, but he held on to the tackle too long and gave away a holding the man free. So yeah, the discipline was just a little bit off there. It wasn't so much about defense for me. It was just a couple of moments where we didn't quite nail it. They got some free kicks, which helped. The rest of those 6 goals from transition were in the second half. I'm not too fussed about that because of the reasons we've already spoken about. And then even then, one in the third quarter came from that 50-metre penalty to Owens for the ball not being thrown back on the full. So just for everyone's knowledge, a free kick or a 50-metre penalty doesn't change the possession chain if the team already has the ball. So in this case, St Kilda had the ball. The ball was then thrown back to him on the bounce. It bounced straight back into his hands, but the umpire paid a 50-metre penalty. So that's counted as being transitioned from defensive 50 into forward 50, even though that the ball was really moved from centre wing inside 50 because of that 50-metre penalty. So look, we'd want to be better for sure, but I thought for the first half where things were taken a little bit more seriously, I thought we held up really well.
Yeah, you're right. And there were definite moments watching that first and second quarter where the Saints really did struggle to move that ball from the back line, and we were really good at slowing that movement down and we were keeping them out of the corridor quite a bit. It was pretty reminiscent of what we were doing back in 2024. Again, like in 2024, the ability to score from those repeat entries that we're creating through that forward pressure was a bit lacking, probably in part due to the fact that we chose to go in with only one genuine small forward in Alashka, who did do some nice things and probably is firming for around one debut. You would expect that the side that runs out against Hawthorn is at least one more, whether that's Kako recovered from his injury or they add one of Gresham or Guelphy to the mix. But I guess on the other hand, if you think about it, only running with one genuine small, but still being able to hold up the pressure showed that sort of the mid-size and taller players were able to provide that forward pressure, which is really important because you can't have gaps in that defensive structure. Otherwise, that's how teams move through it quite easily. And we saw that happen quite a lot last year with some of the players that weren't quite as switched on defensively.
Yeah, we didn't have the small forwards, as you said, and I think where they would have been beneficial would have been in our ability to score, more so than in defending. So in the first half, we won the ball back off St Kilda 6 times in our own forward 50, but we scored just 1 goal from it. So defensively, we held up really, really well. And I think part of the reason was the players that we've brought into that team, Sharp or Dersma moving into the forward line, are switched on defensively. We were really aggressive on that press as well. So in the second quarter, people might remember Zach Johnson taking the intercept mark. Playing from half back, he took it inside our forward 50 and had a set shot at goal. Unfortunately, kicked it behind. So, yeah, to win the ball back 6 times off St Kilda in our own forward 50 and a half of footy is a really, really good outcome. Unfortunately, we only scored the 1 goal from it. We also won the ball back countless times in the forward half of midfield. St Kilda exited, but we won it back from that possession. Probably not countless times. They could have been counted. I just didn't count them. But yeah, we shared a number of examples of those in our analysis on Patreon. So I thought that part of our game in the first half was really, really sound. Like you said, closer to what we saw in 2024. What was also quite similar to 2024 was our inability to turn those into goals. So, yeah, we'd want to see that improve for sure. And I think that's where, Kako and Alashka working together are going to do a little bit more damage. It's also why I want to see someone like Gresham in the team, because I think he's someone that works well in those confines. But you touched on it already. At the 18-minute mark of that third quarter, it was only 7 points the difference. We were getting beaten at clearance, but we'd moved the ball, I thought, well enough to get territory and retain it inside 50 overall. Caddy kicked it behind. They then got a goal from the kick-in. That was the one where Owens got that 50-metre penalty that I talked about. Higgins then kicked one straight after from the centre bounce. Then they got another one a couple of minutes later, another one after that from the centre bounce. So sort of 4 goals in 10 minutes, blew it open, and then the game was on ice really then from there on in. But I think what we'd done up until that sort of 10 or 15-minute mark in the second quarter, or the 18-minute mark, was predominantly built on pressure and that full ground press and then ball movement to actually get territory in the first place, because we weren't getting it from clearance. So I'm not trying to sugarcoat a loss here, albeit one in February or March. I can't remember now when the game was played, Feb, wasn't it? At all. But, if we're looking for signs that a young team is going to play a brand of football that is going to hold us successful in the long term, then I think there were some signs there that there is a genuine shift, that our defensive application and our ability to move the ball down the ground has improved by the players that we've introduced to the team over the last couple of years. Against a team, again, albeit in February, that aren't typically easy to move the ball against.
Yeah. And I think you touched on there, we've introduced players at the back that allow us to move the ball. And that's probably the other positive. And most of the time, the positives you get out of practice games are what you see from individuals. And, particularly those that have really improved their standing. There are a few players that are sort of set in the best 23 that had average performances. You can put that down to it just being a practice match. I don't think a Jai Caldwell or a Sam Durham or even a Darcy Parish were going at 100% in that game. And you'd expect them to perform at a better level in the regular season. But Zach Johnson, someone who was probably on the bubble for selection going into the practice matches, really impressed. We already knew and trusted his disposal, which is going to be really valuable for our ball movement coming out of the back line. It was probably the contested aspects of his game that really stood out. He had 9 intercepts for the game, which is more than he had in any game last year. And I think more than last year when he did play, it was predominantly outside when he played last year. He seemed much more comfortable with contact, and that probably has to do with the fact that he got a full preseason in where he didn't in going into 2024, and having again that AFL experience, he gets a sense of what is coming, and so he's not as concerned about that and is willing to put his body on the line there. And what we saw from him is someone who can really do a job defensively, but also be an offensive weapon from that part of the ground, which is, again, is something we've spoken about with regards to Essendon's ball movement now for 3 or 4 years. He's going to be really crucial to us being able to start putting scores on the board.
Yeah, certainly. I was really impressed by Zach's game. I didn't have him. I'm an admirer. I think anyone who's listened to our show before would realise that I'm a big admirer of him. But I had him out just because I was a little bit worried about his ability to be physical and competitive with Hawthorn's plethora of small and hard running forwards. But he's won me over with that part of his game based on what he's done in the preseason. I think one thing people probably forget, I certainly forget with him at times, he was the youngest in his draft year to get drafted. So context, he's only a few months older than Hussein Al-Ashkar, who was drafted a year later than him. So, yeah, you could almost think of him as the same age as the players that we've just drafted. But you touched on it, 9 intercepts was an equal game high. He had 24 disposals, 7 of those were score involvement. So we talked about that transition game, Humey, and being able to move the ball. Well, he was one that was able to do it and do it to his team's advantage and help set up scores. And yeah, that contested part of the game, if you're looking for an example of that and what I mean, if you just go back and watch the first minute of the game, the ball comes out of the centre bounce towards St Kilda's goal and Zach wins a contested ball and stands up in a tackle and was able to dish a handball off. And look, it wasn't a bruising hit or anything like that, but still it was something that he did with real confidence and conviction and wasn't part of his game last year. So I think they're the things that I'm looking for a lot more than game style, to be honest, this year is how are our young players developing in areas of weakness, in areas of strength, and in totality. And I think so far Zach's showing there's been a lot of improvement there in the off season. I think the others worth mentioning in terms of our younger guys or inexperienced guys, I thought Archie Roberts showed more of his ability to accumulate through the midfield. He had 29 disposals and 4 clearances, nearly 500 metres gained. So doing that from predominantly a midfield role, I thought was a real positive. We haven't had high metres gained midfielders. We sort of relied a lot more on driving that from half back and rather than through the midfield. So I thought that was a plus. But Dyson Sharp's work rate was exceptional. The great Charlie Dons shared a video of him taking a mark at half back and then being the first to crumb a contest at half forward in the same bit of play. I thought his ball use was good. That kick for Langford inside 50 showed a real bit of smarts and awareness. And then I love seeing his attack on the contest against Rowan Marshall, where he put Marshall on his backside, a big 205 centimetre or whatnot ruckman and against a first-year player. And Dyson sort of, won that ball and got it going our way. And then Blackerson's the other one, isn't it? We've already touched on him a little bit, but he took on 2 mature rucks in TDK and Marshall, equipped himself really well. We weren't able to turn that into clearance wins enough of the time, so I think there's some work to do there, and that's probably only going to come with continuity and working with his midfielders more. I do think he's got some what I've called draperisms in his game, where he sort of just runs and carries the footy without an awareness of what's going on around him. I think he could do with simplifying things, become a little bit more predictable for teammates. So there's that passage of play. Was it in the last quarter where we transitioned the ball from half back and got a goal from it predominantly via hands, where he was involved twice in that handball chain and he gave the first option both times. So more of that for him rather than sort of carrying and kicking, I think would be to his betterment, but and the team's betterment, but some really good signs nonetheless from him as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, based on what you've seen from the 2 practice games, and we did our selecting our side for the Hawks prior to those practice games, how has your 23 for that matchup changed that you'd be picking?
Yeah, I've got 2 changes from the 23. I've got Zach Johnson in for Pryor and then Jaden Ewan in for Sardal Hooley. Well, I had that up until 2 days ago, and then the injury to Angus Clark changed that with Pryor coming back in. I think we need him as an option to play tall down back. So he's sort of my 7th defender, given we'll go with Reid, Mackay and Redmond down there. I think, we need someone to play tall when one of them rotates onto the bench, or if, touch wood, there's an injury in the game. I think Zach Johnson picks himself now in pre-season form. And I've conformed a little bit to your thinking about needing a bit more of a lockdown defender. Jaden Ewan's also added a bit more offensive drive to his game, but I'm also comfortable with Al Hooley playing. It is a bit of a toss of the coin for me, mate. But have you made any changes to your team?
Yeah, I have. I had Ridley in my side pre-injury, so I'll be swapping in Zach Johnson for him off his pre-season form. I also picked Elijah Sardis in my round 1 side, but with Roberts looking good in the midfield, I would take Sardis out. And then I'd be bringing in Jackson Pryor sort of as that wing halfback role. We probably expected Roberts to play up until about a month ago. And then I had Daywicks in my side and I'd bring Archie Perkins. With Daywicks, I think there was a lot of positives out of his pre-season, but it does seem to be back in the pack based on the selections during these pre-season games. And I'd also have Gresham on standby in case Kako doesn't get up for the Hawks. I think, as we touched on earlier when we were talking about the practice game, I think we need 2 of those sort of players. And the role Isaac Kako was playing at the end of last year is sort of role Gresham has played at his best there. So that's where I sort of stand with my side.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think so. The major difference is really is I've got Gresham in the team. I think you've got Perkins. I think now because of injuries, we've sort of settled on 22 out of the 23 being the same.
Yeah, well, let's see how that ends up on Thursday night as we see the selection for the Hawks game, which we'll be covering next week. Now, normally in this section of the show, we would cover this week's Essendon news, but I think we're going to park that to next week. Normally, for a match preview, we would have a match to review, but given it'll be our first game, there won't be one of those. So we'll talk about the injury news, particularly with Angus Clark, as he touched on before. And there's also been some contract news about another one of the players that we've spoken about tonight. But we'll discuss those as we ramp up to the Hawks clash. So that brings us to our 2025 season preview. And for a show called Don the Stat, you expect some stat chat. So here we are. 2025 was certainly a record-breaking year for the Bombers, not in any way we would have liked it to have been, but the amount of injuries received by the Dons saw them debut 15 players in 2025, which is the most by any side in an AFL season. Most of these came in the second half of the season as the Bombers lost their final 13 games to finish the year in 15th position with 6 wins at a percentage of 69.5. But even before the injury crisis really struck around mid-year, those 6 wins came against teams that finished in the bottom of the ladder, so the bottom 9, and the average losing margin against teams in the top 9 for the season was 58 points. So even before the injury crisis really struck, we were a fair way off the pace there, and our wins weren't overly impressive against fellow strugglers down the bottom of the ladder.
Yeah, I think we were a little bit more competitive though, weren't we, in games against some of the better sides pre the injuries taking the toll. So I think, at least we had that going for us. We challenged Hawthorn for 3 quarters. We challenged the Pies for a lot of the game, but on Anzac Day. But yeah, nonetheless, it was a tough year. We did have a debutant in each of our first 3 games of last season, Kako, Edwards, and Al Hooley. So I think the signs were there early doors that we were going to start to blood some new players. Dave Wicks and Hayes in round 9, Clark in round 11, Johnson in round 12. It says a lot about what happened in the second half of the year that we had another 7 or 8 debutants and 4 of them came out of the mid-season draft, didn't they? So it's quite staggering, really, when you think back about it now. But all in all, I think a year that was hard to take much out of in terms of indexing where we sit in key areas or key metrics, other than the fact that we were able to get some games into young players, expose them at the level, and probably found some players that we either didn't know we had or had levels that we weren't aware they had. So, guys like Roberts and Zach Johnson showing some signs. Edwards surprising. Kako probably finished the year better than he started, showed some really pleasing signs. Blackiston out of the mid-season draft. So I think I think that's what we ultimately take out of the year, isn't it? That we were able to expose these guys and find some players that are going to help take us forward. Yeah,
indeed. As you say, it is a bit hard to take a lot out of the year given what happened in terms of the player availability. But so we normally would go through a lot of the metrics that we saw from last year and where things would go from there. But as you say, it's hard to take much out of that. I mean, we'll still look at them, but you probably do have to take things that we're about to speak about with a big grain of salt. But the overall numbers for the Bombers last year are probably not reflective of where the team should have been at, although there are still signs that we really should be thinking about when it comes to 2026 and where we can improve.
Yeah, look, for sure, mate. I think that for me, 2024 is a better indicator of where we're at, and I've been using that as a baseline. I know you've been doing the same. So, yeah, should we step into some of the things that we've identified here that might give us a bit of an index of where we can build on for 2026?
Yeah, indeed. And I guess the key area where we really dropped away in 2025 from that 2024 season was in the territory battle. It certainly wasn't perfect in 2024, given we've talked about our scoring issues from those repeat entries. You did have a real sense that Essendon was going to play a style where they would press up high, gain repeat entries, and try and overwhelm an opposition that way. So across that 2024 season, that resulted in a +5 inside 50 differential, which was the 5th best in the comp. Now, as we said, we weren't great at converting those opportunities, which comes down both to delivery inside forward 50, the quality small forward issue we've had for a while, and the fact if the game's all been playing at one end, it gets quite congested and difficult to score. And a few of those issues have once been happy for a while, but it did give us a basis of success that you could see a high-level game plan being built from. But last year, that territory dominance collapsed. We were down nearly 8 inside 50s per game, which was the 15th best in the league. And even before the injury crisis really struck, the numbers are very similar in the first half of the year. So it's really hard to win games when you're getting so much less looks than the opposition at your goals. I know there's teams like the Giants that do like to play from the back and try and move the ball all the way down the field and sort of absorb that pressure. But it's not necessarily one for long-term success unless you really have a really good setup for it, like the Giants do, like the Pies probably did in their first year under McRae, and then they sort of changed the way in which they played in their second year. So it is possible to win from behind, but you've got to have the right sort of players set up there, and we just don't have that at the moment. And that territory battle is also reflected in the way in which our intercept game fell apart. Those big inside 50 numbers were built on repeat entries from winning the ball back off our opposition. We were third for intercepts in 2024 with +2 per game and dropped to 15th last year with -2 per game. So that shift in our intercept numbers is almost solely down to what was happening in our forward half. We were gaining 4 less intercepts there in 2025 than we were in 2024. As we spoke about earlier when we reviewed the Saints game, there were signs that, we're sort of getting back to that level we saw in 2024. So it'll be interesting to see if across the season we can return to those levels this year, because a game, while it won't be perfect way of playing football, it's going to give us a lot more opportunities to succeed than what we saw last year.
Yeah, these two go hand in hand for me, mate. Before I get into that, I did have someone during the week actually ask me the difference between an intercept and a turnover. So by default, all intercepts are turnovers, but not all turnovers are intercepts. So teams can turn the ball over through giving away a free kick when they have the ball. So it might be incorrect disposal. It might be, kicking the ball out of bounds on the full, for example. So you've turned over possession to the opposition, but not through intercept, whereas an intercept is where you mark or get the ball at ground level from an opposition disposal, kick or handball. So the subtle difference, but yeah, they are the key differences there. We were third in the AFL in 2024 for intercept differential and fifth for inside 50 differential. We were fourth for total intercepts in the competition. So, basically we were getting a lot of intercepts comparative to the other teams in the competition and keeping our opposition to a low number. But we were ninth for number of inside 50s, conceding the seventh fewest inside 50s in the competition. So in terms of intercepts, we were as good at getting intercepts as we were at preventing them. But when it came to inside 50s, we actually fared better at stopping them than we did at getting them ourselves. So our inside 50 differential was driven a little bit more by preventing inside 50s than it was by getting them ourselves. That was based on a game that was built on a real high defensive press that, as we spoke about throughout last season, and we spoke about even in the review of the Saints game, won us the ball back, but we struggled for forward half players that could operate in the congestion. When you're winning the ball in your own half of the ground, it often means that most of the players on the ground are in and around your forward 50. So I think, it's no surprise that our list strategy has included adding guys like Kako and Unwin and Daywicks and Roby and Al Ashkar, who can win ground balls and operate really well in that congestion and chaos. You think of that goal that Al Ashkar kicked against the Saints. He had half a step to get it on his boot and he was able to get it through for a goal. That's the kind of attribute that he brings to the team and is really important in a team that is going inside 50 to a lot of congestion, which if we are going to continue to press high up the ground, we're going to see more often than not. But also, on top of that, we've added Zach Johnson, we've added Angus Clark, we've added Farrow, we've added Kondo Giardis as well, who are all really good users by foot and can hit targets in congestion at multiple depths as well. So, long options, short options, and now start to add them with like Archie Perkins. You think if he had a really good example where he had a long entry inside 50 on the weekend to a teammate who took a mark and kicked a goal, to Zach Merritt, to Nick Martin when he's back from injury. And we're starting to get a bit of a profile of players who can use the ball by foot and be really dangerous kicking inside 50 to a more congested forward line. So, yeah, I think what we would hope to see this year is that we see a return to some of those numbers, and then what can our increase in ground level players or improved ground level players and ball users do to help us score better.
Yeah, indeed. And, drawing back a bit before in terms of the game plan, part of that inside 50 problem over last year was the change in our ability to win at centre bounce. So getting that centre bounce is so important, giving you territory, even if you don't score directly from it. We saw it against the Saints, how, they were scoring from centre bounce, but even if they weren't scoring from centre bounce, it did allow them an opportunity to set up and win the ball back and get shots on goal. So it's not necessary. Like the team that wins centre clearance isn't necessarily going to be the best side on the day. But, we went from +1 in 2024 to just over -1 in 2025. And it was still well down early in the year when we still had Draper in the side. So it meant more often than not we were having to play from our back half, and which because of our lack of leg speed and good users behind the ball, we really struggled to do much with. One area, though, that I think we did show improvement from previous years, despite the injuries, was our ability to win the ground balls. Essendon, prior to last year being one of the worst teams winning those loose balls on the ground, with 16th and 15th for ground ball get differential in 2023 and 2024 with pretty severe negative differentials. We rose to 7th last year with a positive differential. So we're winning more ground ball contests than we were losing. And we've been a team that has really relied on controlling the ball in the air for a period of time and really struggled when the ball hits the deck. But it was a pleasing sign from an otherwise difficult year. And we saw at times in season, whether it was part of the Brisbane's game or the second Geelong game, where the contest work and willing to play that dirty ball and win the ball off the ground actually took it up to the best sides in the competition. Now, we couldn't sustain it for long periods of time, but again, it's one of those things that gives you a bit of a blueprint about how we could play going forward that is better at challenging the top side, something we really haven't done for a few years.
Yeah, look, I think that was a combination of things, mate. So, yeah, the recruitment focus, we've touched on that, adding guys who are strong at ground level, but also the first phase in a shifting game style. And you're right, the Brisbane game, the second Geelong game are really great examples. But I've said this and maintained this for quite some time. We needed player turnover in order to see a change in game style anyway. And those two, I think, are closely aligned. But I think the thing to note on this one, we did concede the most marks in the comp in 2025, 106.6 per game. Adelaide, Hawthorn, GWS, Brisbane were the top four in terms of restricting opposition marks, and they were all under 80. So, they're sort of 30 or so marks fewer a game that they're conceding. So we aren't playing, or at least we weren't in 2025 games that had a high number of ground balls. So that the positive differential is a good step. We're winning more than our opposition when they do happen, but we were still 14th for total ground balls per game in the competition, 15th for forward 50 ground balls. So still some work to do, but at least we're addressing it in terms of our list management strategy and the way that we're trying to play the game going forward, because that's where the ball is more often than not in finals and particularly big finals. When you get to preliminary finals and grand finals, the ball's on the ground a lot more. So I think we're starting to see a shift, and it's going to be an interesting one to track this year.
Yeah, indeed. I think if you're wanting to watch for signs of improvement that might be long-term from Essendon in 2026, you're going to be wanting to keep an eye on scores against from turnover. So in the past 4 seasons, Essendon has ranked 16th, 15th, 14th and 17th at scores against from turnover. I think that number really tells you a lot about how a team's playing and what they're doing. So where you turn the ball over, how often you turn the ball over, and then how you're defending it when you do turn the ball over. I think it sort of brings together a whole range of elements of game plan. And if you're doing well in that area, it's generally a sign of a really successful team. Last year, for example, when there were a clear best 9 sides in the comp, only Carlton, who ranked 8th, was around the mark of the finalists when it came to scores against from turnover. Every other side that finished outside that top 9 was below 9th in terms of scores from turnover. So there's a real clear correlation between that and where you're going to finish on the ladder for the most part. So if we're going to improve significantly, that has to change. But as I hinted at earlier, with the different components that really go into how teams get scores from turnover, it's not a simple fix. They all have to work together, those components, in order for that part of the game to be improved in terms of disposal, ball retention, where you're turning it over, and how quickly your players are able to switch from attack to defense mode and get into position when you do turn the ball over.
Yeah, there's a few areas I'm going to track closely this year. There's actually some more complex mapping that I want to do and we'll share throughout the year for our subscribers. I think for me, the game has sort of shifted and, well, probably hasn't shifted that far in this regard, but I think the game is almost played in 4 or 5 phases. So I think there's what you do in attack or when you've got the ball when you're organised. So that might be from a kick in or from a 6-6-6 at a centre bounce where you've got time to set up the ground, a free kick, 50-metre penalty, those kinds of things. Then there's what you do in attack when you're in transition. So you run the ball back from the opposition in general play and pressure's on, you've got to move the ball. And then the reverse when you're in defence. How do you defend when the game sort of stopped and you got time to set up and structure up behind the ball? And then how do you defend when, there's chaos and you turn it over? So I want to put some metrics and mapping together that's going to allow us to track our performances comparative to the opposition in that. I think arguably there's also stoppages centre bouncers that could fit into a class of its own in our game, because I think particularly centre bouncers with the new rules probably stand out quite separately. So at a more complex level, that's something I'm going to be working on over the next little while, and start to share that with subscribers and share some views there. But I think at a more simple level, and the numbers that everyone can follow for me, is scores against on turnover is a big one, as you touched on, but equally so is scores for turnover. It sounds obvious, but if you're not scoring, you're giving the ball back to the opposition generally, and giving them opportunities to score. So I want to see both improve hand in hand. And my expectation is, as we become a team that is better at scoring, we'll see our scores against come down as well, because we'll take pressure off ourselves and off our defence. I think improved ball movement and retention that increases scoring will ultimately see scores against decline. The other watch for me is the number of uncontested marks we concede as a measure of our ability to close space, force the opposition into contests. I want to see intercept differential and inside 50 differential come back to around 2024 levels. Ground balls for the reasons that we discussed, mate. And then transition metrics, the percentage of time we move the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50, and the percentage of times teams do it against us, as well as defensive half transitions and scores for and against in those. So I'm tracking both ways, what we do with and without it, and see if we can shift the needle in both areas.
Yeah. Well, look, let's turn our attention to the list as it stands heading into 2026. We let 9 players go in the off-season in Draper, Laverty, Goldstein, Hobbs, Lowell, Menzies, Shield, Davey Jr. and Smart. So between those players, they played 17.5% of Essendon's game time in 2025, which from a games perspective is a bigger loss than what we had last year. But that said, other than Draper, most of the others were fringe players, or at least were fringe players last year, that when the majority of the side was fit, wouldn't have been playing or were past their prime in sort of a Dylan Shield or a Todd Goldstein situation. So the quality of player going off the list is not massive. They have the potential to be replaced quite easily by the younger players we've drafted in the past couple of seasons. So I guess just in general, and obviously we kept Zach Merritt. So Draper notwithstanding, that there's no real major setbacks list-wise from these changes, and with what we saw from a lot of these players and what we perceive their ceiling to be, the scope of what the team can be is much higher given what we've brought in.
Yeah, I mean, you sort of look at the exits, and there is a lot of experience gone, isn't there? Goldstein, albeit most of that was at another club, 300 odd games of experience out the door. Dylan Shield played a lot of senior footy as well. And then even, Hobbs and Menzies and Draper were all in that sort of, 40 to 60 game bracket as well. So, and Laverde played a lot of senior footy too. So it is a lot of experience going out the door with only Fiorini coming in. So I guess in like for like terms, Fiorini is probably an upgrade on Dylan Shield, maybe not at their best, but certainly in what Dylan Shield was able to produce for us last year. But the rest of the acquisitions were, of course, through the draft. Draper is the headline, isn't he? But he played 14, 16 and 5 games in the last 3 seasons. That's 35 games in 3 seasons. For a bit of context there, Todd Goldstein played 30 games for us in just 2 seasons. So, yeah, it's a loss in terms of what the player he could have been for us, but certainly not the player he was for us.
Yeah, indeed. This time last year, the areas of concern, at least from a depth perspective, we thought with small backs and contested wins. I think we've addressed that through our selections over the past year and a bit. Ewan has shown enough that you feel confident he could hold down a position in the back line, and we both feel confident enough to have him in our round 1 side, whilst the drafting of players like Sharp and the move we've seen from Roberts probably gives you a bit more depth through that contested midfield space. Actually, I did a list analysis prior to the draft, and I identified 4 or 5 key areas of need on our list in terms of player archetypes. And what we got in the draft with the 5 players that we selected pretty much mapped across those 5 areas of need. And it wasn't like we had to reach to fill those areas of need. We picked players based on talent at those areas. So I think we kind of lucked out in that regard with what was available in the draft and what we were looking for. They almost lined up perfectly. I think if you're looking at the big list gaps at Essendon heading into this season, obviously there's a lot of players that you look at and project to be filling those list gaps, and you would hope that they would come on. But, I think the ones that really stand out this year are rucks, where compared to last year, there's less depth and more uncertainty about where everyone stands. And that small, medium forwards role, we had a lot of small forwards on the list last year, but as you can see from the names I went through when I went through the delistings, 4 of those were small forwards that we let go, or players playing as small forwards like a Ben Hobbs that we let go. Just because you have a certain archetype on the list doesn't mean necessarily you have a lot of depth in that space or a lot of quality players there. There's also a lot of players of promise or talent across all lines, and again, whether that results in improved performance is going to come down to as much as coaching and development as anything.
Yeah, I think for me, just looking at list and balance, the experienced ruck backup is probably the greatest loss. There was something, quite comforting about having Todd Goldstein in our VFL, I guess. I'm okay with it. I think we had to sort of let go of the chain at some point, and I think it was the right time. But a ruck is now contingent on, Nick Bryan, 24 years of age, 23 AFL matches coming off an ACL injury. Lockie Blackiston, 27 years of age. So he is a mature body, but 11 AFL games, mostly as a key defender. And then Vigo Vicentini at 20 years of age and 2 AFL games. So it's a very, very green ruck group. Then the backups, Peter Wright's obviously a senior body. Nick Cox, you'd have some concerns given what he's been through if you had to play him in the ruck at AFL level. And then I guess Cal Ryan's the other one that we could throw there. And then I think the other thing too we've lost is the experienced backup key defender, isn't it, or median defender. We're really reliant now on Ben Mackay and Zach Reid to remain fit, which they haven't been able to do so far throughout their career. After that, Jordan Ridley, of course, finds himself injured again. Lewis Hayes is still recovering from his ACL injury. He's only played half an AFL game. And then Jerine, who I've already touched on as potential ruck option, he was drafted as a forward ruck, but he's 19, he's untested at AFL level and now training as a key defender. So he's still really raw in terms of his key defence experience. I guess there's the potential to throw May or McMahon back. That's probably where we do have a surplus, isn't it, in key forward stocks. Play Redmond or Pryor Tall, which I think actually does suit both, but there's a limit to that. They're not going to play on a Harry Mackay. That, they could play on a Jack Gunston, but not the really big, gorillas, as the term is thrown around. Or it's a raw Max Condogiannis, isn't it? But sort of moving on Laverde means that we just don't have that experience to call upon, in terms of depth that we had last year. I do think, to touch on your point, we have enough small forwards on the list in terms of balance. The question mark, of course, is quality and are they good enough? And I think the same actually goes for medium forwards. I don't think we necessarily need any more, but we need to make these decisions at the end of this year on the quality of them. So, and a number of them are out of contract at the end of this year. Daywicks, Perkins, Unwin's out of contract. I'm sure I've forgotten a couple, but yeah, I suspect we're going to learn. I think what Brad Scott has shown in his tenure is he gives opportunities to guys who are coming out of contract so we can really learn whether they're up to it or not. And I think that's what we're going to see this year in that part of the ground. Those guys that are out of contracts, unless we've already made a decision on them, are going to be given enough games to prove themselves and whether or not they're worthy of a spot on our list in 2027 and beyond.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, let's move on to the next topic, and it's a topic that has come up every season preview since we started doing this, and this is the one good thing that's come out of the time that I was forced to teach a business management class, and that was the idea of the SWOT analysis, which, as I said, has become a tradition for these Don the Stat season previews. Essentially, we examine Essendon heading into the season using 4 key metrics: our internal strengths and weaknesses, and our external opportunities and threats. So we'll start with the strengths. So these are the things that Essendon has that could be perceived as strengths. And one thing that I think we've got is a pretty good spread of good to very good midfielders. We do like the cream of the crop. We obviously have Zach Merritt, but there's enough talent across the midfielders we have available that you can sort of plug and play 7 or 8 different players through there and be confident of a reasonable to a high level of performance. Again, is something we're going to touch on when we get to the other side of it, is the issue with the top end. But I think, at a basic level, compared to a lot of sides around us, the depth of our midfield is pretty good. And that means that you're not as exposed, touch wood, if you get 1 or 2 injuries.
Yeah, I agree, mate. I think that depth in midfield is the strength of our list. We've got genuine mid options, but we've also got rotation options now that perhaps we haven't had in the past. You said cream of the crop. Zach Merritt's a genuine A-grader, so we have him. Question mark on Darcy Parish. If he returns to his All-Australian form, then he's pushing into that A-grade category as well, and that would give us 2 in that midfield. I think the watch for me this year is, can Jai Caldwell and Sam Durham take another step in their development? I don't know whether either of them are quite A-graders. I think they could be. Sam Durham in particular does some things that are quite unique on a footy field these days, but can they close the gap between their best and their not so good to be able to go to that level? And then we've got the young guys coming through, don't we, in sort of Sharp and Roby. Farrow probably doesn't get a taste in the midfield in his first season unless we have a year like last year, and let's hope we don't. And now Archie Robertson going through that group, and then, the question mark over Elijah Sardis and where he goes with his footy this year. So, yeah, I think you're right. Midfield depth is certainly the strength on our list at the moment.
Yeah. I think another strength for me, I know you disagree a little bit on this, is that we've built up a much more contested list, particularly in terms of the ground ball. For the first time in a long time, we've got the players that can scrap for the ball on the ground. This is only a strength, though, if we can find the ways to get the ball on the ground more often, as you touched on when we went through the numbers. So despite having a positive differential, the amount of ground ball contests in Essendon games was a lot lower than other teams would have. And there were too many times last year where teams were able to play keepings off against Essendon. I can think of games against the Bulldogs is a prime example. So many times, they would have a player just lead up at the ball and the Essendon player would be a metre or two behind. They'd take an uncontested mark, turn around, and the process would repeat. And we saw that on numerous occasions against different sides last year. So if we can't get to and create a contest, then we're not going to take advantage of what we showed with ground ball. And I think that, a lot of the focus of this sort of the Innes Regan regime is getting them the ability to get to those contests a lot more, and hopefully we start to see the fruits of that, and then can take advantage of it with winning ground ball by creating more contests.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you in, I guess, on paper. I think we've addressed it through recruitment, and that's been important, but I think it's just got to be proven at AFL level and start to see some improvement against good teams as well, and that's the bit for me that leaves it as a question mark. I'd probably see it as a bit more of an opportunity than a pure strength at the moment, just because I think it's an area where we can improve and potentially turn it into a strength. I think for me, our biggest strength as a footy club is now in the back office. For the first time, we've been building this over a few years now, but I think there's always been a little bit of disharmony still between some of the factions around the footy club, not necessarily in it. But I think in the process of Dave Barham, who really united the football department and the board and the executive, I think with Andrew Welsh stepping into that role now, we have a united board, a united executive, a united football department, but also a united coteries and other, past players association and all of those really important parts of the club that need to all be aligned in order for success. I think under Andrew's leadership, we're starting to see that come through already. I think the football department, I know the football department is increasingly better resourced than what it was. I'm sure they would say that there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that's the truth. There is a lot, but that unity and alignment gives us a real fighting chance from the players that we recruit being the right ones, having the right profile of leadership, character, competitiveness in their game, as well as the football skills that they bring, and then how we develop them as footballers, as athletes, and as people. I think, how we research and analyse game trends has gone up another level now through the investment that we've made in things like technology and data. How we track opposition and research them has improved. So we're really starting to put our best foot forward as a football club now and making football a priority. And I think we'll start to see that benefit come through in the development now, first of our young players, and then ultimately in wins and losses or wins down the track. I also think the other real strength, mate, is the resilience of our young group, partly because of what they went through last year, but they're committed. They're desperate to take us back to the top. They've got through that 2025 experience together and didn't really fracture or throw in the towel. Like, even that Suns game at the very, very end, we were outclassed, we were outmanned. It was tough, but they didn't really stop going. Like, it was still a bad loss, but they were still having a crack right to the very end. And I think that shows the character of this young group. I think there's no doubt in my mind that the resilience and unity of our younger group, combined with the changes we've made in high performance, sees us a physically stronger and better prepared list than we had in 2025. And I think that sets us up for success in, maybe not 2026, but in 2027 and beyond.
Moving on to what we perceive as our weaknesses, I still think small forwards, high half forwards is a big area of weakness, especially the way the game is going. And Kako obviously showed enough in his first year to feel confident in him being a key cog in this area going forward. But after that, it's fairly unknown. We're certainly excited about Hussein Alashka, but it's a lot to put on a first-year player. We've even had to move Xavier Dersman forward off the wing because we're concerned about the depth in this area. You've got players like Perkins and Gresham and Guelphy who are all going to get their opportunities throughout the year in these roles, but all have big question marks over their consistency of their performance. And in years where they're all out of contract, they're going to need to give compelling reasons why they should stay on the list. We saw at the end of last year with Davey, Menzies, Hobbs and Smart all not being offered contracts, the club is willing to move these sort of players on, even if they play positions where the club doesn't have a lot of depth in.
Yeah, I think it's a fair call. I think in terms of list balance and quantity, we've got enough, but the quality it remains to be seen. And if you just sort of scan through the list of our forwards, both small and medium and tall, Nate Caddy, we think he's going to be a really, really talented player, but he's only played 27 games. Day Wicks, 5 games. Edwards, 2. Alashka, unproven at the level yet. Hasn't debuted. Kako, again, exciting like Caddy, but only 23 games. May, 7. McMahon, 7. Reece Unwin, just 3. So other than sort of Peter Ryder, 52 games, who can be polarising, I really value what he brings to the side. Kyle Langford, 162 games, and then Gresham, who's polarising as well, and performances certainly dropped off last year. And Guelphy, I think most people have moved past seeing him playing a serious role this year. There's not a lot of experience in that forward line. So, it does. Yeah, I guess, again, we're going to learn a lot more this year in terms of what we got. But I would suspect that we're probably going to be addressing that part of our list in the off-season because you wouldn't imagine they all survive into 2027.
Indeed. I think I touched on this a bit earlier when we were looking at the strengths, but another big weakness is just that lack of A-grade match-winning talent. Zach Merritt is A-grade, but he's more that, A-grade consistent across a game. You see how much of a difference a player like Nasiah Wanganeen Miller makes, obviously, with the way he played last year, and we got glimpses of that on the weekend there. And those are the sort of players that can really win you games when the going gets tough. We have a good handful of players who could become this level, but they're all still probably a fair way off being at that level consistently. The top players are the difference in the big games, and not having enough of that A-grade top level talent is one of the reasons why we've struggled against the best sides for so long.
Yeah, I mean, Desai's a good test case, right? Like he had a good start to his career. He's been a relatively consistent performer from day one, but it was really last year where he exploded and went from being a good player to one of the very, very, very good players of the competition. So it does show that players sort of need to get to that 60-plus game mark before they really can demonstrate themselves to be a high-grade talent. So, that's where Durham is at the moment. Caldwell's sort of in and around that mark as well. Nick Martin, too, obviously not there this year. So there's some guys potentially showing that they could step up and be a match winner. The ones for me, though, I think that show those attributes are Kako, Caddy, and probably Roby as well on what we saw at him at under 18 level. Yeah, they're far too raw or early in their AFL careers before we can bank on that yet. So yeah, you're right. We don't have that guy who. I think we've got guys now that I go to the footy really excited to see what they're going to do on the day. But we don't have that player where I reckon if you're a St Kilda fan this year and it's a close game, you'd be going, great, we'll throw Naz into the midfield here. And whilst he's around and the game's close, we're a chance of winning. We don't have that. Even Zach Merritt, as good as he is, as consistent as he is great because of his consistency, not necessarily his ability to turn a match in a short space of times. Yeah, we haven't unearthed that just yet, but I think we've got some guys who show some glimmer of hope there for us.
Yeah, we sort of let that, we had that player a little bit in Jake Stringer, although his ability to do that was there was often a fair bit of gap between his best and his worst in doing that, but he was one of those players that was capable of it. We haven't really had that since he left last year. As we pointed out when we went through the stats, defending turnover remains a primary weakness for the Bombers. I think the fact that we've drafted good ball users in the play in the back half over the past couple of seasons in Johnson, Farrow and Kondo Giannis, we expect to feature in the back line at the stages through this year to go with good ball users already there in Zach Reid and Jordan Ridley. So hopefully we can limit our turnovers in the back half, which would result in less scores from turnover. But again, as we touched on when we looked at the stats, it's a real watch this season to see if we can.
Yeah, it's a game of relatively small margins overall. The AFL average in 2025 was 46.6 points from turnover. We conceded 59.3 points last season, better than only West Coast. A two-goal improvement in that area, it gets us to, around AFL average, at least based on what it was last year. Teams moved the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50, 23.3% of the time on average. Teams did it to us 30% of the time last season. Geelong made a grand final being just better than AFL average, 22.9. So, again, it's sort of small incremental gains in how we retain the ball going inside 50, and then incremental gains on how we set up behind the ball and defend can see us take some bigger steps towards, taking that from 30% to, 26, 27%, and then again to sort of 23, 24 and be in and around that AFL average. I don't think any of us pretend this is a year where we're going to jump from, where we were to a top 4 team, but if we can get some incremental gains in lots of areas, then they can start to add up to some real improvement in key ones. And as I think, people are probably sick of me talking about this, but I think a lot of it our improved defence will come from our ability to use the ball faster and retain it inside 50 better.
Yeah, indeed. Moving on now to the opportunities that come from external aspects. And I think the fixture gives us a real opportunity this year. We have double ups against North, against Melbourne, against Port, who are all projected to be around the bottom of 6. And then also the Giants, who have sort of become beset by injuries and could be quite vulnerable. Both Melbourne and Port have had positive press in the preseason. I think a part of that is down to who they've played. And I think both of them having new coaches, they're wanting to start off really well in the preseason, has probably seen them perform at a higher level than other teams have during the preseason. I think they're much closer to our level than the preseason suggests, which means the opportunity to bank some double up wins is there going into 2026. Obviously, that's not guaranteed, but I think the draw has opened up a little bit for Essendon, particularly with the Giants' injury crisis. They could potentially put that wild card final spot in play.
Yeah, I do think Port will be better than a lot of pundits expect, but yeah, there's definitely some winning games there. And I think our start to the year, famous last words, but, there's some opportunities there. I think a round one game is always, in most cases, anyone's game. I know we have the disadvantage of Hawthorn playing, but I also think we've got strength where they have weakness. So, our opportunity to get off to a good start, I think, is there for us. We then have Port in round 2, albeit at the Adelaide Oval. We have North in round 3, which we think is winnable. The Bulldogs is always a tough test for us, even at the best of times in round 5, but it's then the D's in gather round who we've got a pretty good record against over there. The Suns away will be a tough trip, but then it's the Pies on Anzac Day, and as we've shown, even when we've been down the bottom of the ladder, Anzac Day is a contest, in and of itself, and would give us a chance. And then, Brisbane's a tough game, albeit in Melbourne, and then it's the Giants away, Dockers at home, and then into Richmond in the Dreamtime, and then West Coast in round 12. There's no bankable wins for us, of course, but I think the fixture is set up for us that we should be able to, or hope to be able to get some wins early. And if we can get some momentum into our season, then with a young group who we would hope would start playing some exciting footy, who knows what might be able to happen for us.
Yeah, indeed. I think another opportunity for us is that this is probably the year in the last few where, at least from external sources, the expectations for whether Essendon will finish have been quite low. It's been pretty rare for me to see a ladder predictor, whether it's been done by the media or from fans, that has Essendon outside the bottom 4, and a good chunk of them have us finishing in bottom 2. So, Essendon will always make the news because of the size of the club we are and everything that's gone on with us. But, that lack of external pressure could allow the club more time and space to develop across the year. Obviously, the internal expectations will be much higher, as they should be. But, I guess it does give the Bombers a bit more freedom to experiment and try things for longer without necessarily that external pressure from wins. Again, the internal pressure to win is going to be high. But given where everyone expects Essendon to finish, or everyone outside of Essendon, you probably get a little bit more leeway with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure on this one, mate. I don't think there's any free hits for us. I mean, we've just had a 6-week campaign bringing up old wounds, and now we've got, Danny Corcoran and Kevin Sheedy talking about how James Hirst should be the coach of our football club. So I think that the media can write you off and then still go hard at you when you prove their own expectations right when you're a club like us. So, yeah, I think there's an opportunity to surprise, but I don't think the lack of expectation, in and of itself is an opportunity for us. I think, they're going to go hard at us no matter what happens. If we surprise and win 11 games, they'll knock us for not winning 12.
Yeah, probably fair enough point there. I think the final opportunity I want to bring up is that we've got a real opportunity to bring a core group of talented youngsters together with the increased resources that the club has put into development. And we've got a big chunk of it in before Tasmania distorts the draft. I think we've timed our focus on the draft really well in this regime. And, everyone went through the additions of Gold Coast and GWS, and people have seen just how much of a setback it can be needing to rebuild a list whilst concessions for expansion sides are in place. It really sort of locked in that top level of the ladder, and only some teams who sort of did the majority of their drafting from sort of the back end of the 2000s were able to rise up the ladder. It looks in some way we may be shielded also by Tasmania due to the academy and father-son players that could potentially be coming our way, although it does sound like the AFL are going to change the rules on us when teams have made decisions 2 years in advance about what they need, and the AFL are going to change it again. It does make it a bit difficult for the teams that have those players coming up, as opposed to the teams that have already lucked out, like the current, like Graham Wright's old mob up in Brisbane, just as he changes the rules. Yeah, so there's still an opportunity there to have that talented group of youngsters with enough of a core that could mean that you're not overly exposed to Tasmania. But yeah, we'll have to see whether the academy and father sons can actually come through.
Yeah, Greg Swan, you mean there, of course, mate, the new head of footy at the AFL. But we had Dave Barham on the show, was it sort of back in November 2024 from memory, and he spoke then about the strategy to get into the draft and load up in the early parts of the draft ahead of Tasmania. So, what we're seeing now isn't by accident. It's been something that we've designed for a number of years to sort of rebuild our list through the draft. We haven't used the word rebuild, but it's been what it is. We have 15 players on our list from the national draft 2024 onwards. So that includes rookies, SSP and mid-season drafts that had not been on an AFL list before. And then there's a further 24 from 2023, plus Burke, a Category B rookie from Ireland. There's a group of 20 out of 44 players that are coming through this together, started at the footy club within sort of 24 months of one another, driving each other to improve. We've got a core group of players aged 24 to 28 that aren't that far ahead of them in terms of age, but because of injuries over the last few years, they've got 60 to 100 games in them a little bit sooner than they may have otherwise, and still have room for improvement in their own development. So, yeah, the age profile of our list is really healthy and in a really, really good spot for growth and development and improvement. So, yeah, I think it's the single biggest opportunity that we've got, along with that strength in unity and of commitment from our back office, is that we have a serious depth of young players now who are coming through together.
Yeah, indeed. I guess turning to threats, and I spoke about the lower expectations potentially being an opportunity for us, and you rightly brought up that the media is always going to talk about Essendon, and the one thing they're always going to talk about this year, given what happened at the back end of last year, is about Zach Merritt's future. And particularly if we start losing, there's going to be constant speculation about what Zach's going to do, which could potentially destabilise the club further. I think everything Zach does this year is going to be watched like a hawk, no pun intended. Even the way in which his teammates engage with him on field or even on social media, it's going to be who didn't like Zach Merritt's post or who's unfollowed him. It seems like rather than paying for copy editors and sub-editors, the newspapers and the media organisations pay for people to scour social media feeds. So they'll probably be watching everything to do with Zach quite closely. As much as you like to think that the players and the club could ignore that sort of thing certainly does have a way of infiltrating the functioning of a club and functioning of organisation. So I think this is a big watch that, if things start to tail away, that speculation and that stress could compound things a lot further.
Yeah, look, I think, you know what, I don't think I even want to add to it. I think you're right. I think it's going to be nauseating. I think I'm sick of it already. It is going to be a challenge for how we handle it internally. I think the club and the players will probably handle it better than the fans will. So I think it's going to be a bigger challenge for fans than it will be for players. But yeah, it's certainly it's certainly a threat to the season, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think the other big threat is not really for this year, but it's more of a long-term thing. Putting aside Tasmania, I feel like the way in which the current AFL drafting, trading and free agency is set up, the way lists are set up, the way the salary cap is set up, it's seemingly making rebuilding to be a top 8 team, really challenging. It's almost like the top 8 of the AFL ladder, or the top end of the AFL ladder is being like in the Australian cricket team. It's harder to be dropped from than to get into. So I guess once you make it, there seems to be there's a lot of tools that allow teams to stay up, and obviously these teams are well run enough to stay up. So you've got to reward them from that. You don't want to punish a club for being well run, but it certainly does feel like at the moment that it is really difficult to build your side up to a point where you can be competitive against the best sides consistently. It almost seems like it's a bit of a luck of the draw whether you get the right father, son, or academy player through, or you get a go home factor player that can come and help you out there. And I think we are as sort of a middling bottom Melbourne club at the moment. That's almost the worst of all the worlds there in terms of attracting talent. Obviously, things can change, and if you have a well organised club and you look like a club where people want to be at, that can be a change in of itself. But I just think the way in which the structures and the incentives of the AFL system are currently set up, it does make it more difficult than it has been in the past to sort of build your way back up.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess the Crows are an example of someone who have been able to do it. They hadn't won a final, hadn't played in a final since the grand final in 2017 and finished on top of the ladder last year. Obviously lost their 2 finals and went out in straight sets. And you touched on go home factor. They've had that as a benefit in being able to attract some players to the club in a 2-town city. That we don't have that advantage. We're in a much more competitive market for talent. When Isaac Rankin or went back home, he had a choice of 2 clubs, whereas in our case, we'll be in the Zach Butters chase, I'm sure, but there's going to be 10 clubs in that chase. So, yeah, it is a different market, that's for sure. But I think we've got ahead of it quite well with what we've done over the last few years. I think we need to turn that into results this year, not necessarily purely winning games or a certain number of wins, but in how we play to sell that hope. And I think if we do that, we've got the depth of young talent, and I'm sure we'll continue to add more to it, but also the salary cap space and a board that's prepared to be quite bold to go hard after top talent. So, yeah, I think we're well placed, or better placed than we have been in a long, long time, to do that at the end of the year if performances back that up. I think unlike in the past where we've gone and chased the likes of Shield and Stringer and whatnot to bring into our team, this time around we know that we've got some decision makers who are going to go after the right type of players that complement what we have and what we need. But also we have a strong depth in first round picks and high end young talent that we've sort of added to our list over the last few years. So we'll be looking for sort of cherry on top players rather than, the cherry, the cream and the cake all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, moving on to our final segment of this season preview, and this is where we both make 3 season predictions, and then we can look back this time next year and just laugh at how bad we are. And I went back and looked at what I said this time last year, and I had a bit of a shocker. I said Xavier Dursman would be the All-Australian wing. He certainly had a good year and probably one of his best years that he's had in his career, but he wasn't All-Australian level. And I also said that Dylan Shield would get a 2-year contract offer based on his role off halfback. And he only lasted 2 rounds there, and he's now off the list. So it really shows what I know. Sorry, Dylan, for putting the mods on your career there. So, yeah, take all these with a grain of salt. But my 3 predictions for the year. Firstly, I think all 5 of our national draftees will make their AFL debuts by Dreamtime. I think that's actually being overly cautious, especially if Sullivan Roby does come back and starts playing VFL from the next week or so. We could see them all by Anzac Day. But I think the first half of the year, we'll see all 5. 2, I think we'll have a more chaos-oriented game style. I think the fitness work done by Innocent and his team is going to lend itself to getting to more contests, and that's going to lead to more contests, which is going to lead to a bit more of a chaotic style that's not so reliant on holding on to the ball. And my third point is the biggest win in Brad Scott's tenure was actually in his very first game. It was against the Hawks in 2023, where we won by 53 points. And ever since then, we've really struggled to put teams away. I predict that in at least one game this year, everything's going to click for the side and we'll end up with a win that's a bigger margin than that 53. And we might actually have a game where we can sit back and be comfortable about the result rather than constantly threading and biting through our nails as we struggle to overcome the might of West Coast and North Melbourne.
Yeah, that's a feeling I don't remember. Yeah, haven't experienced for a long time. I'm bad at these two. I haven't gone back to check my predictions, and I thank you for not bringing them up, Humey. So you've been very kind letting me off the hook there. It's almost made me want to do a reverse moz and maybe predict a team we don't like to win the flag or something like that. But mine are that Ben Mackay makes the All-Australian squad. I think he'll get back to, his 2024 form and above. And I think that was a good baseline. And I think if he steps up from there, then he puts himself close to or in that 40. I think an Essendon player will finish top 3 in the Rising Star voting. I'm sitting on the fence a little bit. I haven't nominated a player here, but I think we've got enough depth of young talent that someone is going to step up and really shine. And I'm predicting that we're going to set a new membership record this year. I think our fans will start to like what they see in the early parts of this season, even if the wins aren't completely there, but like what we're building and building towards and want to be part of it. So I think they'll jump on board in record numbers.
Yeah, fingers crossed that comes true. Well, look, that will do us for this evening. We're wrapping up the preseason episodes, getting into the real stuff next week. So thanks so much for your efforts this preseason, Jono, especially with the countdown. It's got so much traction, and you did a mountain of work putting it all together. So once again, thank you for that. A reminder to all listeners that our pre-game drinks will be continuing this year. MCG games, it's Founders Bar, and at Marvel games, it's Goat Bar. We're there from when the gates open to just before the ball is, well, not bounced anymore, but thrown up. So everyone is welcome to join in. As I said, we'll be back next week with our preview of the Hawthorn clash as we look to start season 2026 on a positive note. Any final words from you, Jono?
Yeah, just want to give a quick shout out to my youngest nephew, Hudson, who had a little bit of minor surgery this week and recovering really well. He's back at home, but it's meant that he's not able to talk at the same velocity that he normally does for a few days, and he's finding that hard. So, Huddy, hope you're recovering well, mate, enjoying all the ice creams, and I love you very much. Get back to full health soon. Looking forward to, watching some footy this weekend. Long weekend in Melbourne, of course. So, plenty of chance to sit down and take a look at our round one opponents and see how they go in their round 0 match, and then get right behind the build up to that round 1 game against the Hawks. So I can't wait, mate.
Me neither. And get well soon. Hudson there. Well, again, that will do us for this evening. As always, as we wrap up, stay safe and go Dons.